He built my entire reputation on being the professor nobody could rattle. Pero niño, no, but you 3-year-old graduate student unraveled 12 years of that reputation in a single semester, leaving me pregnant, terrified, and staring at a bloodline result that shouldn't have been possible. My name is Nikolai Fenwick. I'm 31. I'm an Omega. And for the last 6 years I've built my entire professional identity around being the hardest, most exacting lecturer in the graduate genetics program at Ashcombe University. The one students called the Alpha behind my back. Not because of my biology, which I kept carefully suppressed and completely private since my first year of teaching, but because of the ironclad discipline I ran my lab and my lectures with. No excuses, no exceptions, no softness that could be mistaken for weakness by a department that never fully trusted an Omega to hold a tenure-track position in a field this competitive. He chose that reputation deliberately, even little brick by brick, starting the day I watched a brilliant female Omega colleague get quietly passed over for department chair in favor of a considerably less qualified Alpha, simply because the search committee assumed an Omega couldn't manage the political weight of the position. I decided, that day, that no one would ever have grounds to make that assumption about me. I suppressed constantly, scheduled my heats with military precision around semester breaks, and never once let a student see anything other than the controlled, demanding professor who graded without mercy and expected excellence without exception. Desmond Achebe walked into my advanced population genetics seminar in September, and within 3 weeks, he had become the single most disruptive variable in coffee had spent over a decade engineering into something completely predictable. It was an effort of three. As second graduate student, he was transferred into our program from a smaller university overseas, with a research background that was frankly unusual for someone his age. Publications already under his name in journals that most doctoral candidates didn't touch until their 5th year if ever. He was quiet in class, watchful in a way that unsettled me slightly, and completely unafraid of me in a way none of my other students had ever managed to be. Your critique of the Hendrix model doesn't account for the epigenetic variance in the Omega samples, he said, during the 3rd week, in front of the entire seminar, with a calm confidence that would have gotten anyone else a considerably sharper response from me. I stared at him for a long moment. You're right, is it finally? Because he was, and I had never once let my own pride get in the way of acknowledging good work, even when it came from a student who apparently had no intention of being intimidated by my reputation. Rewrite the section. Bring it to office hours. He did. And that was how it started. Not with anything dramatic, but with a graduate student who kept showing up to my office hours with work sharp enough that I couldn't dismiss him. Conversations that kept extending past their scheduled time. A professional respect, that gradually, almost imperceptibly, became something I looked forward to more than I wanted to admit. I noticed on tesar con ano poli particular anxious sent anxiety most unmated alphas his ideas carried around senior faculty. The way lab equipment seemed to respond to him with an unusual sensitivity during our shared research on hereditary marker expression. The way when I stood too close to him at the whiteboard one November afternoon, something low and unfamiliar stirred in me that I hadn't felt around anyone in years. I told myself it was nothing. I had spent 12 years not being the kind of Omega who let anything as inconvenient as attraction interfere with her professional judgment, and I was not about to start with a student 28 years my junior at heart regardless of the 8 actual years between us. The problem was mi suppressance. Cortecuardo es flawlessly for over a decade. Chose the worst possible week to fail. The same week Desmond and I were finishing a joint research submission in my lab, working late into the night with a deadline bearing down on both of us. I felt it start around 10 in the evening. A warmth I initially attributed to exhaustion and too much coffee. The same mistake I'd later realize every Omega in these situations seems to make. By 11 my hands had started to shake, and Desmond, sitting across the lab bench from me, went very still. Professor Fenwick. His voice had changed, gone careful in a way I'd never heard from him. You need to leave. Now. I'll walk you to your car. I'm fine, I said, which was, as it always is in these situations, a complete lie. He made it exactly to the parking lot, before my legs stopped cooperating. The fever hitting with a suddenness that suggested my suppressant patch had failed hours before I'd noticed. Not minutes. Desmond caught me before I hit the pavement, and I felt, in the instant his hands closed around my arms, something I had genuinely never experienced with anyone in my entire adult life. Instant, overwhelming, biological recognition. You're not just an unmated alpha, I managed, through the fog already closing in. What are you? He didn't answer immediately. He got me back inside, into my office rather than the open lab. Locked the door and stood on the opposite side of the room with a discipline that, even in my compromised state, I recognized as extraordinary. The kind of control most alphas twice his age couldn't manage. I need to call someone perhaps, trying to suppress anti-concern. Get them all point to on PFS and let you premise my phone. I need to understand that clearly. Whatever else is happening to both of us right now. He kept that promise. A colleague of his, a beta friend from the biology department, Arrived within 40 minutes with emergency suppressants from the campus clinic, and Desmond maintained that same careful distance the entire time, gripping the edge of his own desk hard enough that his knuckles had gone white, clearly fighting every instinct in his body to stay exactly where he was. It wasn't until the suppressants took effect, until I could think clearly again, that I asked him directly what I'd asked in the parking lot. "What are you, Desmond? I've been around alphas my entire career. I've never felt anything like what happened out there." It was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke it was in some correfesión, que was to the same careful precision brought to his research. My family doesn't publicize this, for reasons that will probably make more sense once I explain it. I'm what geneticists in my home country call an Enigma bloodline, a term for an extremely rare alpha lineage, documented in fewer than 30 confirmed cases globally, where the compatibility marker responds to essentially every omega with elevated intensity, rather than the standard percentage-based range everyone else experiences. It's not romantic. It's a genetic anomaly that made my adolescence considerably more complicated than most people's, and it's the reason my family moved me between 3 different countries for my education, trying to keep the diagnosis quiet. I stared at him, my professional brain immediately trying to process this as data even through my own residual disorientation. That's not in any literature I've reviewed. It's not published literature. It's family record, and about quarter papers buried in obscure regional journals that most Western databases never indexed. He looked at me directly. "I didn't tell you because I didn't think it was relevant to our working relationship until about 10 minutes ago, when it became extremely relevant. I should have ended things there. Every rational professional instinct I'd built over 12 years told me to transfer him to another advisor immediately, to put distance between us before anything else complicated an already complicated situation. Instead, over the following weeks, I found myself doing exactly the opposite, extending our working sessions, finding reasons to consult him on research that didn't strictly require his input, discovering that the connection between us hadn't been some temporary hormonal fluke, but something that continued building steadily every time we were in a room together. We didn't act on it for 2 more months, both of us keenly aware of the professional lines involved. Until Desmond, with a directness I'd come to associate with him specifically, addressed it head-on during a late evening in the lab. "I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear it instead of retreating into Professor Fenwick mode," he said, setting down the sample he'd been analyzing. "I'm formally requesting a transfer to Dr. Alvarez's advisory group next semester. Not because anything's wrong with our research. Because I want to ask you to dinner. Properly, without either of us having to pretend the reason isn't obvious to both of us." I stared at him. "You'd give up a year of research continuity over this?" "I'd give up considerably more than that," he summed, "to stop pretending I don't think about you every single day in ways that have nothing to do with genetics."
That does further with to do with enthusiasm.
Once the professional line between us had been formally removed, Desmond asked me to dinner exactly as he'd promised, properly, with none of the ambiguity they had defined the months before. We were together for 4 months, careful and quiet, before I discovered I was pregnant, a discovery that, given everything the Enigma designation implied about his biology, sent both of us straight back to the genetics literature we'd built our entire relationship around, searching for any documentation on what an Enigma lineage pregnancy might actually mean for me. "There's almost nothing published," Desmond admitted, 3 days after I confirmed the pregnancy, both of us surrounded by every research database either of us had access to. The handful of cases in my family's private records describe elevated bonding intensity and accelerated compatibility markers in offspring, but nothing conclusive about maternal risk. Y sé que no tiene información. En sé que mantienen un dataset. Carefully without panic, cataloging no with what it wants. And then we monitor everything. Every marker, every trimester, more carefully than any pregnancy in this department's history. We did exactly that, with Desmond bringing the same rigor to my prenatal monitoring that he brought to his own research, consulting specialists in reproductive genetics, tracking every marker with a thoroughness that turned what could have been a terrifying unknown into something we approached together as simply the most important research project either of us had ever undertaken. The complication came in my 6th month, when routine blood work revealed a hormonal pattern the specialists had never seen before. Not dangerous, as it turned out after 2 additional weeks of careful monitoring, but entirely unprecedented, confirming that whatever the Enigma lineage actually was at a genetic level, it was expressing itself in our pregnancy in ways that existing medical literature simply had no framework for. "I need you to know something," Desmond told me, during one of the more anxious weeks of that monitoring period, sitting beside my hospital bed after another round of tests. "If this had happened with anyone else, if I passed this lineage to someone who wasn't as rigorous, as careful, as exactly suited to actually understanding what we're dealing with as you are, I don't know that either of us would have handled the uncertainty as well as we have. You didn't choose me because of my genetics expertise," I said. "No." I agreed. But I'm grateful every single day that the person carrying my child happens to also be the smartest geneticist I've ever worked with. Our daughter Adaese was born healthy, 7 months after that pregnancy began, with markers the specialists are to this day still documenting for what will eventually become the first properly published case study on Enigma lineage offspring. Research that Desmond and I are co-authoring together, ensuring that no future family navigating this rare biology will have to do so with as little guidance as we did. It never went back to being simply the alpha the department used to whisper about. I'm still exacting, still demanding the same standard I always have from my students. But I stopped hiding the fact that I'm an Omega. Stopped suppressing constantly out of fear that any softness would be read as professional weakness. Desmond finished his doctorate under Dr. Alvarez and now works alongside me as a full research partner rather than a student, our names appearing together on papers that neither of us could have written alone. Do you know what I learned from all of this? I asked him. The night Adaese turned 6 months old, both of us exhausted and completely unwilling to trade it for anything. Tell me that I spent 12 years building a reputation on never being caught off guard by anything. And the best thing that ever happened to me was a graduate student, whose entire existence was one enormous unpredictable variable I couldn't control. Desmond smiled. The semi-careful, precise smile I'd first noticed across a seminar table years earlier. And I spent my entire life being told my biology made me too complicated for anyone to actually want to understand. You were the first person who looked at that complication and simply decided to run better tests. Today, 2 years after a failed suppressant patch changed the entire trajectory of my carefully controlled life, I still run the hardest genetics lab at Ashcombe University, still hold my students to standards nobody else in the department dares enforce, and I do it now with Desmond beside me instead of hidden from me, and our daughter's genetic profile slowly rewriting an entire field's understanding of what rare biology can actually mean when someone finally takes the time to study it properly instead of simply being afraid of it.